Ladies and gentlemen, if I could, before we begin, mention a few of the special people that are here today with us. We have some members of the Board of Directors of the Council, our distinguished Chairman, Annette Strauss, Dr. Norman Newrider, our Board President, our Secretary, Arlette Dufiad-Galland, Patricia Patterson, who actually is instrumental in making this event happen today, Mr. Herbert Hunt, Tom Sampson, and a new board member, Jane Dunn, I believe, who is here. I'd also like to welcome our City Manager, John Ware, and we have C-SPAN television covering this event today, so we're very happy they're here as well. From the Persian Empire of Darius the Great and Omar Khayyam through the Shah and the Islamic Republic that vexes so many of our foreign policy makers today, Iran has stood at the center of history. For a trip through recent Iranian history, the development of the oil industry, and to penetrate the enigmatic veil which covers today's Islamic Republic, we have two of the foremost experts on Iran in America, and they happen to be related to each other, which is a particular coincidence. Born into Iran's most powerful aristocratic family, the Prince Monashir Farman Farmian was born 80 years ago to this day. So we'd like to wish him a very happy birthday. He has been a witness to the history of modern Iran, serving in key positions as Director General of Petroleum and Mines in Iran, Director of the Iranian National Oil Company, and as Iran's first ambassador to Venezuela, a fellow OPEC member. He was one of the founders of OPEC and was intimately involved in the negotiations which created that organization. Roxanne Farman Farmian, also a princess, I might add, is a West Coast editor of Publishers Weekly, Princeton graduate, and the author of a number of important articles, including one in the New York Times last week on our policy towards Iran, a very important article. She also is the founder of the Iranian and Independent magazine. We are pleased to have them here today. We'd like to ask Roxanne if she would come up. We will have question and answer after their remarks, and please feel free to ask a question on both Iranian history or the current situation or the OPEC or the oil industry. I think they have a broad understanding of all these issues. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you all.
Stuart, thank you so much, and what a pleasure it is to be here. This is my first time in Dallas, but I've been hearing wonderful things about it because I am such a lucky girl. I have a brother who is married to Pat Patterson's daughter, Patricia Patterson, Farman Farmian, and I'd love her to stand up for a minute so you can honor my sister-in-law. It is a real pleasure to be here in describing a book such as my father and I have written together as a father-daughter effort. I would like to describe some of the reasons of writing a book like this. Not only is it to lift some of the mysteries about a country that has caused this country a great deal of difficulty recently, but it is also in the hope that by offering a background and a little bit of the history of why things have become the way they are, we as a country can approach Iran today better and understand how to solve some of the difficulties that we are facing, both policymakers, oil men, all of the different areas in which we have business, if you will, with a country such as Iran. Blood and Oil is a book very much about my family, the Farman Farmians. When we think of Iran, and when we think of it as not being run by the Ayatollahs, we do think of it as having been run by the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and his father, Reza Shah Pahlavi, were in fact the only two of their dynasty that ruled Iran. Reza Shah Pahlavi was put onto the throne at the beginning of World War I by the British. He was then removed by the British at the time of World War II, and Mohammad Reza Shah, the Shah we think of as ruling Iran, was put on the throne in his stead. Prior to that, for 150 years, the dynasty that ran Iran was the Qajar dynasty, and that is the dynasty that our family is from. The father of the Shah, Reza Shah, who was put on the throne at the time of World War I, worked, in fact, for my grandfather as a guard in his military. And it's interesting because I was just in Washington yesterday, and the last couple of days we were in the Capitol for a gathering. And as I was looking at the statues of Jefferson and Washington and Lincoln, I was thinking, these statesmen dealt with my family as they were working out policy with the Middle East. The family lasted on the throne until World War I, and that was about the time that my grandfather really started his harem. He was obviously a man who'd grown up with his dynasty ruling Iran, and at the age of 54 truly began a harem that in the end included 8 wives and 36 children. My father is one of 35, and I'm one of 100 and some odd cousins, and we know each other very well. We're a clan. One of the reasons why we have remained a close clan is that my grandfather, my father's father, realized as the change of dynasties took place that education was going to be the one thing that would help his family survive, his children survive. And he therefore sent every single one of his children abroad for their educations. And this was after he died, continued by the mothers, who he had in fact all educated, and who then continued to send their children abroad, many of whom returned with master's and doctorate degrees in a range of fields. So as Iran started its massive modernization process, you can imagine that 36 brothers and sisters returning from abroad, fully educated in the Western ways of thinking and managing, had an enormous impact on Iran and its ability to change. And that's why a story such as we've written, which is in some senses very much a family chronicle, a very personal chronicle, is also the history of modern Iran. One of my uncles was head of the central bank, who at the time was responsible for making up the development plans. Another was an architect who designed the airport and the Shah's palace and a number of other major buildings, including the exhibit building at the World's Fair in Montreal. My father obviously went into oil and was one of the major negotiators in oil throughout the period before World War II, and dealt with the very difficult to deal with Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. It's an area that he will explore a little further when he speaks. After World War II, he remained as a negotiator until his cousin, Mossadegh, first cousin, nationalized oil in 1951. And my father didn't agree with him thoroughly, and at that time, therefore, was sent into exile by Mossadegh. Something that for me was very lucky, because he came to the United States and married his first wife, an American, and had me. He returned afterwards to Iran to again join the oil company, National Iranian Oil Company, and again, he will go into this more thoroughly about his creation of OPEC. And these were great days. That was followed by him becoming ambassador to Venezuela just at the time of the oil embargo, which the Arabs carried out and which Iran did not join. So in 1973, an enormous amount of money started pouring into the coffers of Iran. And it was a very difficult thing to manage. How do you spend money when you have no infrastructure to bring goods and services in, not enough roads, not enough portage? On the other hand, the people of a country feel entitled to that money. If you're not giving it to them, they feel as though you are putting it into Western banks for the sake of America or England or France or whatever. So it was a very difficult time, and when he returned to Iran in late 1977, the place was blowing up. And it was a revolution that he then had to leave within a year and walk out across the border with the help of Kurds, who, luckily for us, in some ways were my grandmother, my father's mother, was from the area of Kurdistan, so there was a link there, and we had that connection. And it was an extremely difficult escape. It's the first chapter of the book, as you discover in the reading of it. And luckily, my father made it, because here he is, and I will hand over the podium to him. Thank you.
Strauss, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here, but I don't know really after what my daughter said whether I have anything to say at all. You heard all of it. And I cannot elaborate too much. I want only to say a little, and now that we were told that Cyrus the Great and my ancestors, in fact, in Iran lived for a good 3,000 years, I want to tell you a little story. I'm not a very good storyteller, but I hope you will think about it and see whether it is right or not. At the time of Cyrus, and the time the Iranians were in power before Christ, several hundred years before Christ, we were the predecessors of those Romans who had arena, and they threw the prisoners in the front of the land to fight out their lives, whether they could get out or whether they couldn't. And in one of these ceremonies that the Shah was sitting on the top and looking what is going on, and very eager to see the show. There was not, in those days, television and the pictures, but that was the show of the day. So he was looking there, and suddenly he saw the lion coming out, a big lion, and a small man, very shaggy and very small and very insignificant, and each of them facing each other. And suddenly the man approached the lion, and he whispered something in the ear of the lion. And the lion turned back and went to his den. He never came out. So the Shah called the guy, said, "Look here, chum, what did you tell him? What was going on in here? We were looking for a show. There was no fight." And so he said, I said, Your Majesty, to him, that remember that after a good lunch, you have to make a speech. So that's a Persian story. Yeah? So there is not much for me to say. Just as we're talking about Cyrus, I just mentioned this. What I want to tell you in here, maybe a few words, it is about really the Americans who have been doing a lot of work in Iran. Don't go around to think that the Americans have been getting into Iran only in the last few 20 or 30 years. There was the first American ambassador who came to Iran. I don't recall, he was called Arnold, I believe. And he came to Iran, and he lived in Iran in 1870. Well, he wrote a book, The Persians and Persia and the Persians. He wrote a very important book about Persia. He was an erudite, he was a scholar, and he wrote a book. The book is very rare to obtain. But you see, the Americans have been coming and going to Iran very often, very often. The Persians got to know the Americans very well at the beginning of the century, especially after 1900, because there were invasions in Iran. The invasions were by the Russians and by the British. They divided Iran 3 times between themselves, and somehow Iran was saved by the Americans. I mean to say the unity of Iran. It wasn't divided into half. The last time, indeed, it was in 1946-47 by Truman, who have definite proof that Truman set his foot down because the Russians had come to Iran during the First World War and they never left. They refused to leave. Truman, honestly, he was the savior of Iran at the time because apparently he just made Stalin know that he was a tough individual and he was going to receive the bomb if he wouldn't get out. So Iran was saved by him, honestly. So always after that, we thought, well, let's move and do something with the Americans because they are not the type of people who really grab everything. At least there is a little bread left over so that the people will eat it. And that wasn't the case of the British, at all the case of the British. The British had been really in Iran looting and killing and stepping on everything and everybody, and they were after undue profits. Even when they had a contract, they never paid. I was the Director General to receive these pays from the Ministry of Finance, and we never received any pay at all. They refused bluntly to pay a cent to us. So we're looking for the Americans to come around and help us. This is what happened. In fact, it happened. When the oil was nationalized, nationalized by my cousin, Dr. Mossadegh, he was a nationalist. He didn't have any axe to grind besides to throw the British out of Iran. He didn't think about finances, money. I've got to sell oil and do this and that and so forth. I knew him personally very well. I used to see him very often. He was a nationalist and he wanted to throw the British out of here. That was his aim. And for the rest, once I went to tell him that, look here, my good cousin, these people are ready to pay us 160 million pounds sterling immediately for certain jobs that they have to pay. First, let's receive the check, and then nationalize. He wouldn't hear anything about it. He just practically told me, get out of here. I don't want any money. I want just to throw them out. So it gives you an idea that what was the position of a country at the time. When, again, some arrangements were made, in any case, that Hoover, the son of the famous President Hoover, came to Iran. I was present and representing my government to deal with him. There's a picture in the book, which I insisted it should be there, when I went with Mr. Hoover, Herbert Hoover Jr. He came to Iran and we had a lot of talk together with other people. And we made a contract in which the Americans made a consortium in Iran in which they had 40% of the Persian oil. Hoover had been in Iran after the war. I had met him. However, this time Hoover came and he was accompanied by the famous oil man called expert Walter Levy. He came with and they made the deal really in Iran at the time to settle the Iranian oil. And it was settled. Later on, we had, in 1958, 57, it was in Cairo, I was there representing my government, without any power. I was an observer in this conference. And we came to talk about certain aspects of oil it was in Egypt. And I came to talk with Perez Alfonso, the Minister of Oil of Venezuela, and they had been after a job themselves. They had been very much in the Middle East 2 or 3 times to find out whether there was any possibility that we should come to some sort of understanding, some sort of exchanging the views to find out whether we could better our position. The position was not to better about finances. That wasn't the problem. The position was about payment to the labor, to the staff, to housing, transport. I mean, it is electricity, water, and this and the other, which we knew that the Americans were paying in Venezuela, and their standard was much more higher and much better paid to the labor. This is what we were after, to finish, to do something, to get down the discontent of the people who were thinking that we don't do anything about it. So we were thinking that let's have the copy of the Venezuelan system in Iran. I said to him that I was with him if he wanted. He told me, let's sign a kind of record of that. I didn't have any power at my government. I was there as an observer. But nevertheless, the suggestion was so good that I agreed with him. The next day we got together with some other people. At the time, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Venezuela, and me, and Iraq. Those countries couldn't sign it more or less because they were still under the protection of England, especially Kuwait. They hadn't independence. And they were very careful about the British system of stopping the government down and this and the other. Nevertheless, we were five who signed a gentleman agreement. The gentleman agreement had nothing to do with payment. It had to do only with exchanging information about the labor and about the system of running the company, but it was well understood it would be the system of the Americans in Venezuela. It was well understood this. Otherwise we wouldn't have anything to sign. We did. So we continued with this about 10 years and nothing happened. In fact, we just worked and we got to learn things. We got to do, the price of oil was constant and it stays as such. But unfortunately, the companies, I won't go through length of these, you know it yourself, in those years of 1960, they 65, they suddenly say, at the beginning of 62, they suddenly brought the price of oil down, especially BP. The price of oil had been, after the war, $2, and then it went to $2.02, and then it went to $2.22. Then after that time of 1960-61, it came down to $2, it came to 178, it came down to 168, even 66. So these governments of ours started to rumble with their budgets based on that money that you were going to pay at the end of the year. So if they couldn't get the money, they couldn't pay the people. So the idea came there that how about us doing something to fix the price with these companies? That came there, not at the time of OPEC when I signed the agreement. However, that was the main basis of the OPEC transactions. It wasn't anything else. However, it degenerated to a kind of race for the prices, and one of these articles is writing that, I'm writing in my book quite a lot about it, that how am I going to justify in the front of a public the rise of the price of petroleum? I'm not trying to justify anything. I want only to justify one point in the front of you here. That when the prices went up, I was involved with it. At the same time, the price of the dollar, the entity of the dollar we had never come down, ever, started to fall down. That was in those years of 70. I was ambassador in Venezuela when the first time came. Then the United States gave up the gold standard. Nobody wanted to take notice of this because there was a quantity of millions and billions of dollars, which were called euro dollar, which we don't talk anymore about it. In those days, all the time we talked about it. Euro dollar in here, euro dollar there. Are you using euro dollar in France, in England? We have forgotten all about it. So these euro dollars were already pain in the neck of the United States because they didn't know what to do with these euro dollars sitting in Geneva and in France and England. So by giving up the gold standard, they managed to devaluate the dollar. So these dollars were devaluated as well. So as there was a level of dollars found, because the franc, Swiss franc, I remember it was about 4 at the time, it fell. It fell to about 2. I was going with my children to ski in Switzerland, and I remember as a favor they gave me 2 against the dollar. And I was thinking it was outrageous because the power of purchase of the dollar was almost much higher than 2 Swiss francs where you could take a coffee. So this was the position, and really the Americans and the American public was not aware that the rise of the gasoline or the scarcity of the gasoline or the manipulation of the dollar had nothing to do with us, had nothing to do with OPEC. And I have a document from Walter Levy himself who wrote to me that he's calculating that the rise of the price of petroleum in the year 1975 is less than the inflation in the United States. So it gives you an idea that we didn't make any money. That was false. That was a false representation. So that's what happens really to the OPEC, which today, I will finish with this, that the OPEC today has lost its power. It hasn't got its position it had before. It hasn't got its unity. If I were really in the shoes of Venezuela, I would get out of OPEC. I've been talking many times with the minister in charge, every minister. I believe that OPEC has lost its entity, its purpose, and its power. Firstly, it is producing maybe 50% of the oil used in the world. In those days, it was producing 80%. Today, what is 50%? It's about 28 million barrels, while the others are producing even more, 30 million barrels. Anyhow, it has lost its purpose. We should think about something else, maybe. And the oil of OPEC is of no importance today to anybody in the world. In fact, it isn't. Big sources had been found in Venezuela, which I knew on. And today, I think the companies, these large companies, the Europeans and the Americans themselves, are spending in Venezuela alone $65 billion in the next 10 years. I honestly think that we are at the dawn of the development of petroleum, because they are thinking to spend under $50 billion in the north of Caspian Sea. They have got to feed all the countries of Europe, from Russia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the others. Then, remember, China is coming. I saw a report the other day which says that China, they expect that in 10 years' time it will have 300 million cars. So imagine it has only 100 million. Where do they get the petroleum? Where is it? It isn't available. At the present time it is. For sure it isn't. Imagine yourself all the Southeast Asia, millions and millions of people living in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Indochina. So these people will want petroleum which has to be supplied one way or the other. I believe there will be great development of petroleum. Persian Gulf is not going to lose its importance. It's going to be leveled up its importance with the other centers of oil. One of them may be in the north of Caspian Sea, maybe, I'm not sure. But the Venezuela is absolutely a sure game. They are already there, they are spending money there, and maybe Colombia. But Venezuela already is pegged for $63 billion to be spent in 10 years' time. That's more money than it has been spent in Venezuela since the beginning of oil in 1934 in Venezuela, in one go. So it gives you an idea that there is a big development. There is somehow rumbling. There's something rumbling. We are hearing really something from far away. But it is there that we should consider that it is coming. And it will come. There is no doubt that it will come. I'll finish, I've been talking too much, I think, by saying all this. This is my mentor is sitting in here. She makes sign that I've got to give up and come round down. Well, thank you so much for your patience and your kindnesses.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have time for several questions, and I would ask you, because we're televised right now, if you might be able to use the microphone over to your right in the front of the room. And I will ask the first question while people, if there are any questions, will go to the microphone. The U.S. has been burned a few times by looking for a third path in Iran, a moderate Iranian polity that we can establish relations with. Does this exist, and what do you see as our future, the future of our policy there?
I'll start on this. My father may have a comment. This is in a sense, the question I addressed in the New York Times op-ed piece. For 17 years, this country has isolated Iran. Obviously, the wounds of the hostage crisis are still very raw, and Iran has continued to be exporting terrorism. In fact, at the moment, we're hearing that the situation inside Iran is getting worse, worse than it's been since very soon after the revolution. So obviously, things are not good in Iran, and as a antagonistic power to speak with, it has also been very difficult. However, it is a very important country. It's geopolitically key. My father referred to the Caspian, which is going to be the source of another oil boom coming up. It itself is possibly developing nuclear weapons. We haven't got sure news of this, but we do know that there's a lot more nuclear power in the country than there has been for many years. It is the challenge of the United States to look at the problem that Iran presents and possibly start thinking of another solution, to my mind and my father's. This is a great country, and if one thing doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for 17 years, there are always other solutions to try. And perhaps that time has come. One of the things that is compelling for this country is that after the Gulf War, the amount of American troops in the Gulf has gone up enormously. And the danger to those troops rises as long as a country like Iran is being isolated and there is no dialogue. And although we do not have a final confirmation that that awful incident in Saudi Arabia was contributed to by Iran, it's that type of thing that will rise as long as there is no dialogue between Iran and this country. So it is our hope that perhaps by getting a little bit of background that we provide in the book, and also it does seem as though there's a bit of a sea change in the administration's outlook under new direction by Secretary Albright, that perhaps there will be an opportunity to start approaching the situation with Iran from a different angle and hopefully start coming to some solutions.
If you consider what has been happening in Iran with the sort of fundamentalist Islamic government, put that in a broader context of what is happening in the Islamic world in general. And if one wants to take a very pessimistic view, one can see a very dark future and ultimately some kind of clash between these two worlds, kind of a, I don't know, reliving of the Crusades or something. But just how do you see the rest of the Islamic world and the development of its revolution in the Iranian context?
I honestly would say that your question is so relevant and so difficult to answer. I've been thinking so much about it as well. That you see that if in North Africa, this is the point, in Algeria, in Egypt, which are big agglomerations there, I believe that the impact of the Muslim system in Iran has been very great and very effective. There are reasons for it. Firstly, you must remember that the Quran has been written in a different way from the other religions. The last book to have been written by somebody who claims to be a big prophet. Therefore, he had been taking all the other books and he had been putting them together and he had been coordinating them. His idea of government, of course, is the government of religion. He doesn't talk at all about any other thing, that the religion should direct the way of living of the people. For instance, in the Bible, there is no mention of the laws and legislations about any crimes or any wrongdoing which could be taken as an example and to be ratified and to be taken by a judge. Well, the Muslim laws really put everything in the hand of a judge who's an Islamic judge. So that already changes the aspect of the country, but it doesn't answer your question. The problem is that for the present time, Iran has fallen in that reason, which we don't want to enter the reasons now, fallen into that line. Indeed, it has become a very great menace. You are right. I'm sure you think about that. How to avoid such a menace, how to get the other people not to do the same thing. Because in my opinion, for instance, in Egypt, there is a kind of dictatorial power which doesn't allow such a thing happening. Well, I come to think at the end, whether you are not going to agree with me. Don't. I honestly think that many countries cannot follow the concepts of the Americans. They can't. You have somehow let them act the way they want to act and maybe get out of their problems. For instance, the human rights, they interfere today in every aspect of life. I can see it in Venezuela. They when they want to they interfere, but they never say what are the crimes in other places. Once if somebody killed in the street, they immediately interfere. Well, I can see the Venezuelan government is extremely handicapped by an institution which is not it is a world institution, but it is outside the institution of the government. So they are extremely handicapped. And they cannot act the way they should act, to be stiff, and they don't have the money to provide the judges. They don't have the money to have the prison. They don't have the money to educate people. They don't have the money to eat a piece of bread today in Venezuela. No matter what you say, I live in Venezuela. I asked my mate the other day, well, this money that I give you, and honestly I pay her 50% more than she would use. I was driving her to near her house, and I was going to my office. I said, what are you going to do with that? It was only $20, $25 a week. No, I'm sorry, it was $35 a week. So imagine $35, which is over 50% of the pay. So I said, you have got 2 children, and what is going on with this 30? She said, I pay $15 for my rent for the week, and $20 for my 2 children to eat. So somebody is taking care of them as well, who's getting the money. So imagine, what can they eat with $20? 2 children and a woman who is taking care of them. So people are living in utter poverty and utter misery. I asked her, well, how do you supply milk to these children? You know what she told me? Something which you would never believe, never think about it. She said, we buy spaghetti, we put them in water, we shake it, and then it makes a milk, we give them to drink. So it gives you the poverty of the people is so high that so we get to the point that if you go around the whole time say, well, if they don't do this, we're going to interfere to do that, and we're going to do this. The problem is that those people have to be left somehow alone. If they want to treat badly the people, they already have treated so badly the people in the world, that in their country, that let them do it. What can we do? The United States is not going to be the world conqueror and to impose its laws and legislations over there. If you can't do that, you better leave the world. This is a problem that we cannot finish. It is an interference in the business of countries, which the United States is doing, without any success. And the others are going to suffer from it as well. I'm sorry, I didn't exactly answer your question, but I have no answer to it.
One of the statements made in this review by Fred Halliday is that the picture that emerges, or one of the pictures that emerges from this book, is that Iran is a country more wronged than involved in wrongdoing itself. And I wonder if we also accept the idea that Khomeini's regime is as shallow and not underpinned at all, is that I'm just thinking about the future and how we look toward the end of that. When you've got Islam as the fastest growing religion in this country, for example, I mean, it doesn't seem like the spread is going to stop. And I'm just sort of interested in your comments about the future, and also about that, the wronged versus the internal wrongdoing.
In the article, it says that one of the pictures that emerges about Iran is that it has been more wronged than it has done wrong. It has had more things happen negatively to it.
Yeah.
I'll start. No doubt my father will have a comment too. First of all, I think that it's always very easy to blame others, and I do want to make sure that it's clear that we don't feel as though what has happened to Iran is all other people's fault. Certainly we dealt with difficult things to do with Britain and with American, but in the end, as the American phrase is, the buck stops here, and it was definitely much of what happened to Iran has been caused by its own rigidities and its own attitudes. I find at the moment to look forward that it's hard to look in a crystal ball. There's going to be an election coming up in Iran on the 23rd of May, so towards the end of this month. At that time, the president, Rafsanjani, will have to step down. He's been there since the time of Khomeini, and he served 2 terms, and by the Constitution of Iran, he has got to step down. One of the things that is unclear in this country is that Iran has an elected government. It has had a constitution since 1906. Unlike any of the other Gulf countries, it goes to the polls, and although you may or may not like the candidates that it has up, it does elect the candidates of its own choosing. Now, in an illiterate country, that also has a different perspective than in a country such as here, but nonetheless, people do go and place their ballots. In this particular case, Rafsanjani has been sort of a hope to this country. He's been the more Western-oriented, perhaps even more democratically oriented leader of all of the different leaders in Iran. The fact that he's going to be removed seems to be somewhat of a setback. However, I have read a number of arguments that have posited that even though his probable successor, Natek Nouri, who is at the moment head of the parliament in Iran and is much more religiously rigid, nonetheless does represent some of the same team that some of the other leaders in Iran represent. And one of the difficulties in Iran is that it's been very factional, and literally the right hand knoweth not what the left hand does, and that has become worse. And I think that one of the reasons why there's increasing repression in Iran right now is that there's truly a great deal of friction at the top. So although the successor is possibly less Western-oriented after these elections, there is a chance that by being a more cohesive force at the top, it will be an easier country for outside negotiators to deal with. And I must say, whatever works, it is our hope, obviously, that the repression within the country lessens. There's one.
This is the last question.
I have really 2 questions. That's sort of one is, how does the current regime justify its, I guess, promoting terrorism outside of the country? Why is it doing it, and how does it justify it? 2 is the U.S. What they call the Iran Contra bill having any effect on Iran? Is that a good situation? Is that causing it to rethink its situation?
I cannot say how it's justifying terrorism. That's something I cannot possibly put myself, and I don't think my father could either, in the minds of somebody who hurts and destroys other people. As I say, I think the only reason that it is, one thing I can say is consistently you hear the president, for example, denying that they have anything to do with that they are not exporting terrorism. And I really do think that that's because there are groups that are trying to bring down the presidency. I mean, one hears in the Palestinian area of, anti-Arafat people, the people that are against that leadership. Well, the same thing, I think there's the military arms, the guerrilla arms of various leftover groups from the revolution that are trying to make the regime a lot more frightening than the regime itself would like to claim to be. To answer the other question, it's interesting, since the embargo started with this country on business with Iran, the economy in Iran has actually improved. In fact, it has improved quite a bit more than a number of countries who have enjoyed American help. And it does make one wonder, by being thrown upon one's own resources, whether, in fact, a country sometimes doesn't become stronger. And there's a funny article, before I finish up, that I just saw where there are an enormous amount of American goods in Iran, including Barbie dolls, which the regime is most concerned about because they think of it as sort of a Trojan horse of all sorts of values. And therefore it has come up with its own Barbie doll, which is got a chador, and instead of having Ken, it's the brother called Dada, and there's a sister also in a chador. And this is the type of thing that makes an internal country, internally quite strong. I also finally want to make one last thing, and I want for the both of us to, since we're finishing up, to thank Pat Patterson for helping all of this come together. Thank you so much, Pat, and thank all of you.
Thanks to both of you. Because it's your birthday, we usually have a little gift, but because it's your birthday, I wanted to make a special presentation. We have a gift for you, Ambassador. And Roxanne, we thank you for your insights. We wish you well on your book tour, and we thank all of you for coming today and spending the time with us. Thank you very much.